Tonight, we begin with a decision that immigration attorneys, civil rights advocates, and legal experts had feared, warned about, and prepared for. A decision that unfolded not over months of deliberation, but in a single afternoon. A single afternoon that upended the lives of over 500,000 young people. A single afternoon that reversed decades of legal precedent. A single afternoon that left families across America wondering if they would be torn apart. What the White House did today crossed a line that even moderate Republicans had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, immigrant communities did not hesitate. They responded with urgency, defiance, and an organized resistance that caught Washington off guard. For months now, there had been signals, not official announcements, not formal policy statements, just signals, that the administration was preparing something unprecedented. The White House has been aggressive on immigration, yes, but they have been calculated in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a predictability. But what set off alarm bells in immigration law circles this week was that the pattern went silent. Analysts who monitor executive action drafts know the indicators. The sudden cancellation of stakeholder meetings, the reassignment of key DHS personnel, the unusual coordination between ICE and DOJ, the sudden media blackout from usually vocal officials. All of that went quiet. And whenever this administration goes quiet on immigration, it means something is about to get loud. Early this morning, legal watchdog groups detected what they described as unprecedented executive activity, including the movement of draft orders through channels that had not been activated in over 12 years. These are the kinds of procedural moves that the White House only uses when they are signaling something very specific: a major policy reversal, a constitutional challenge, or an all-out legal war. Immigration attorneys didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that the administration was changing its posture on DACA. And when any administration shifts posture on protected status without explanation, even by small procedural steps, the entire legal community pays attention. The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program has protected young immigrants who came to this country as children since 2012. These are people who grew up American in every way except paperwork. They went to American schools. They served in the American military. They started American businesses. And today, with the stroke of a pen, their futures became uncertain. The statement issued by immigration legal groups tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Attorney after attorney, organization after organization described the administration's move as cruel, legally questionable, and perhaps most importantly, deliberately designed to create chaos. But chaos only works if the target hesitates. DACA recipients did not. In fact, their response today was among the most organized we've seen in modern immigration advocacy. Here's what we know. Within 3 hours of the signing ceremony, advocacy groups had filed emergency motions in 4 federal courts. These weren't standard legal challenges. These were coordinated constitutional attacks. Legal strategies that immigrant rights groups only deploy when they are preparing to take a case all the way to the Supreme Court. Lawyers worked through the night. Phones rang off hooks. Young people who had built entire lives in this country suddenly faced the prospect of deportation to nations they had never known. Tonight, multiple sources confirmed that the new executive order targets not just future DACA applications, but current recipients whose status is up for renewal. This means that anyone whose protection expires in the coming months may find themselves without legal status, without work authorization, and without protection from deportation. The administration moved before courts could issue protective injunctions. They targeted the renewal process. They targeted employment authorization. They targeted the very mechanism that allowed DACA recipients to live and work legally in this country. In other words, the administration targeted the infrastructure of the program itself, the components that made it functional. This is what made immigration attorneys' warnings so urgent. The executive order wasn't just symbolic. It was immediately actionable. It represented the kind of move that could displace hundreds of thousands of people if left unchecked. And advocacy groups, understanding that fully, responded with force, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't file scattered lawsuits hoping one would stick. They didn't rely on public outrage alone. They hit the constitutionality of the order. They hit the procedural violations in how it was drafted. They attacked every legal weakness the order presented. And here's where the story becomes even more alarming. Legal experts now believe that the administration's latest move was designed to test the resolve of federal courts after months of conservative judicial appointments. The White House wanted to see whether judges would defer to executive authority on immigration. But instead, the opposite happened. Within hours, a federal judge in California issued a temporary restraining order blocking portions of the new policy. The ruling was so swift, so definitive, that even administration officials noticed. You don't get this White House's attention easily, but today the federal judiciary did. Constitutional scholars speaking with reporters under anonymity described the administration's strategy as legal brinkmanship, a way to force the issue to the Supreme Court as quickly as possible. But immigrant advocacy groups proved today that they remain both prepared and unified. Their legal filings were not only comprehensive, they were coordinated so precisely that identical motions appeared in multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. That coordination matters because it shows institutional readiness. It shows that DACA supporters are not passive observers in their own fate. They are active defenders of their rights. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of the community response. The ACLU activated emergency legal hotlines in all 50 states, forcing their phone systems to expand capacity. United We Dream, the largest immigrant youth organization, deployed field organizers to communities that had been quietly preparing for this moment for months. Churches and community centers operating as sanctuary spaces reportedly saw record numbers of families seeking guidance and protection. This wasn't just legal resistance. This wasn't just political opposition. This was community mobilization. This was collective defense. And collective defense is the one thing the administration has struggled to overcome since taking office. For every immigration restriction they have attempted, advocacy groups have countered with something that delays, challenges, or undermines implementation. Remember, the administration thought DACA recipients would be isolated. They thought the issue had lost public attention. They thought Americans had moved on to other concerns. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Polls show overwhelming public support for DACA recipients. Major corporations have issued statements defending their DACA employees. Even some Republican lawmakers have expressed concern about the order's scope. The assumption that this would be an easy political win has proven catastrophically wrong. What makes this moment so critical and so revealing is that the administration's latest move happened at a time when the president is under mounting political pressure. Hardline immigration groups want mass deportations. Moderate Republicans want compromise legislation. Business leaders want stable workforces. And evangelical supporters want family unity protections. The president is balancing these demands while facing declining approval ratings on immigration. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. This executive order may be less about policy conviction and more about political survival. The Department of Homeland Security's statement, now circulating widely online, was designed to signal that the administration is not willing to tolerate what they called amnesty by inaction. Officials said plainly that the previous approach to DACA was inconsistent with congressional intent and constitutional limits. That is bureaucratic language for, "We're ending this program regardless of the human cost." You don't usually hear that tone from DHS unless something serious is at stake politically. The administration is willing to absorb legal challenges. They're willing to absorb public criticism. They're willing to absorb international condemnation. The question is whether they're willing to absorb electoral consequences. Meanwhile, the head of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus addressed reporters in an emotional, defiant press conference tonight. She said, "These are our neighbors, our colleagues, our friends. They are American in every way that matters." She said, "We will not stand by while families are destroyed by political theater." And she said, "History will remember who stood with the dreamers and who stood against them." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from lawmakers who understand just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. The administration's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the DACA executive order, ICE announced expanded enforcement priorities in sanctuary cities. The Department of Justice issued new guidelines limiting asylum claims. Border Patrol increased detention capacity by requisitioning additional facilities. All of this happened within the same 72 hours. When an administration moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. This isn't a single policy change. This is a coordinated campaign. Legal analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that the administration is preparing for a Supreme Court battle they believe they can win. Another is that the administration is attempting to force Congress into passing restrictive immigration legislation. A third possibility, the one worrying advocates the most, is that the administration is attempting to create enough chaos that DACA recipients self-deport out of fear. But today, DACA recipients took that card off the table. They didn't hide. They didn't panic. They didn't scatter. They organized. What we're watching now is a test of American values. The administration wants to see if they can dismantle protections without political cost. DACA recipients want to show that they belong here and will fight for their home. Democrats want to prevent mass deportations of young people raised as Americans, and the courts want to prevent constitutional overreach. The next few weeks will determine which vision of America prevails. Tonight, we've heard from sources who are now monitoring enforcement patterns in major cities. They say ICE activity has not increased despite the announcement. They say the temporary restraining order has created legal uncertainty for agents, and they say the administration's decision to move so aggressively is likely part of a broader electoral strategy intended to energize the base before upcoming elections. But DACA recipients are not backing down. In fact, DACA recipients are speaking out more boldly than ever. Their response today, swift, coordinated, and defiant, sent a message to the administration that these young people will not go quietly. And it sent a message to the American public that this fight is about who we are as a nation. As the week goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly the administration hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that the legal community's response was timely. It prevented immediate deportations. It bought time for legislative solutions. And it demonstrated that the rule of law still functions. What happens next will depend on what the administration does in the next 30 days. If they retreat, this moment will be remembered as a turning point for immigrant rights. If they escalate, advocacy groups have already shown they are battle-ready. They have shown they are prepared to fight in every courtroom, every community, and every ballot box. And tonight, for the first time in months, the White House appears to be recalculating. The Oval Office is quiet, too quiet. And when this administration is quiet, it means they are strategizing. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, the White House learned something they should have known all along. DACA recipients are not statistics. They are not political pawns, and they are not leaving without a fight. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The dreamers are awake. Their allies are mobilized, and America is watching. And we will be here, covering every development, as the next phase of this historic battle unfolds.